Hello guys and girls, Bored now back with you for another movie review, and this is another brand new release. In fact, in the UK it's coming out this Friday, and that is the latest film from Martin Scorsese. It is called The Irishman. It reunites him with Robert De Niro, their first film in years. It's their ninth film overall and possibly their last, and I'll get into the reasons why that might be the case when I talk more about the film. But it's a massive cast. It reunites Scorsese with many of the actors he's worked with over the years. Harvey Keitel, who's appeared in at least a couple of his films, Mean Street and Taxi Driver. He's hit briefly in this film. Also Pacino, who actually Scorsese has never worked with, remarkably. So they finally get to break that. They said apparently they've wanted to work together for years. And also Joe Pesci. Sorry, I'm little lost on this video. Joe Pesci, and he was in Goodfellas, of course, and that's particularly significant because he was in retirement, and Scorsese got him out of retirement for this movie, so that's a really big deal, and great to see him back on screen. So you can see it's a really big, meaty cast, and it does have that prestige sort of feel to it because of all these big names returning and working with Scorsese for the first time in years. And, all the way down the line, really, the cast are strong. The supporting cast, someone like Stuart Graham, who's a really great British actor. He's consistently good, and he has a good part in this film. You've got Anna Paquin in there in a supporting role. Some really fine actors, pretty much throughout the cast, even in the smaller roles. So yeah, certainly the cast is there. It's just what the film's going to do with them. So this is a Netflix movie, and it's obviously a big deal with Scorsese, the latest big name, moving over to Netflix, or at least having one of his films on that platform. So it's a big coup again for Netflix, but there has been some sort of middle ground with this. So this is getting a small cinema release, because again, with this big cinematic prestige type film, a bit like Roma last year, I mean, people do want to see this on the big screen, and certainly it's a movie worth seeing on a big screen. So there has been some sort of compromise where it is getting a small release, and in the UK that is going to be from this Friday, and then after that it will go on to Netflix at the end of November. And I actually saw it a few weeks ago at a special preview screening at my picture house. So it was the closing night film of this year's London Film Festival, and so they had around the country, sort of film satellite link from there. So yeah, I saw it a few weeks ago, and I thought with it coming out this week, it'd be a good chance to review it and give just some general impressions. So I mean, Scorsese generally is a director I like. He's done a lot of interesting films. He's done a lot of significant films. I think in terms of the gangster genre, which isn't one of my favourites, but I think his gangster movies tend to be quite unique and distinct and quite different. He certainly brings a very different perspective to them, and I think has been known as a cutting edge director of gangster movies. Certainly puts his own spin on that genre. And I think this is no different. I think this you will see some similarities between some of his films, but also it does do some different things. It does play with kind of story and character. Um, and I've liked a lot of Scorsese movies. I mean, he's done so many now, then there's going to be a fair share of ones that aren't so great. And there are ones I don't like. I really didn't like The Silence from a few years ago. I thought that was really boring and undramatic. And there are ones along the way I don't like, some maybe a bit overrated, but there's a good core of really great movies and some interesting movies. He's obviously moved more into documentaries recently and has done some interesting stuff there. I think more than anything, what's worth saying is then his name, his brand, and sort of what he stands for in the movie world is it kind of transcends any of that. It's almost like he's seen as one of the good guys in protecting like the reputation of film and kind of standing up and really putting a voice out there for like obviously he's been behind reissues of like classic older films and he's one of those, he's this constant name supporting independent art house film. I mean, I can remember about 10 years ago I went to the London Film Festival and I saw an Argentinian film. I think the title was A Week Alone or something. So something like that, and it was this sort of satire set on like this like sort of middle class estate, like suburbs kind of thing, and it was about these kids who are just left to their own devices. The parents have gone away and neglected them, and yeah, it's sort of a satire on that and what these kids get up to and the dangers when they are just neglected. But I mention it because Scorsese had his name on that as a producer, so that's a really good example. Because that's, a pretty obscure film and he was supporting it. And more recently, I noticed his name popped up on The Souvenir, which is like an art house British movie. That one annoyed me more actually because I really hated that film. So the fact that it had his name on really bugged me. I know a lot of people have really liked that film, but I hated it personally. So having Scorsese's name on it sort of tarnished that. But anyway, the point stands. I think he has this name, this reputation. It's almost like his name transcends, the qualities of his films nowadays. So I think he's a really important figure in filmmaking. Obviously, I suppose I have to touch on his recent comments about superhero movies and the online debate, and I won't spend long on it because it's quite simple. I think he was being a bit snobby. I mean, you could see his point, and a lot of people probably would agree with some of what he had said, but for me it doesn't really, I guess that's personal taste, and I guess if you like superhero movies, you like them, more the power to you. I mean, I'm not against them. Some of them I really like. There's some that I think are quite poor, and some I'm just indifferent to. I mean, I'm not a massive superhero fan, or comic book fan, but I do enjoy a good comic book movie, and I like to check most of them out, or as many as I can anyway. I think when they work, they sort of really work, and I can see the appeal of them. And there's a lot of diverse ones, but anyway, I don't. If it's just a personal opinion and they're not for you, then that's fair enough. But I think Scorsese, to actually make the comment, they're not cinema, I did think that overstepped the mark a bit, and that was a bit snobby, and it did feel a bit elitist. I mean, certainly there are films by so-called acclaimed directors that are less cinema or less cinematic than a lot of Marvel movies. I mean, I guess in a way, well, the silence that scores. I mean, I guess it was sort of had a style to it, but I mean, it did. I mean, it was certainly undramatic, as I said, and it certainly wasn't this great piece of cinema. Um, but I mean, a better example, something like Steven Spielberg's The Post. I thought that was uncinematic, and you see lots of films which they just have a very standard look, and they don't feel like exciting bits of cinema. But anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. But the point was, yeah, I thought the remarks were a bit off by Scorsese, especially the not cinema part. I mean, that's not really for him to say. I think he can make a judgment on the films and say, well, they're not for me because of this. But to make a sweeping comment like that, they're not cinema. And I don't think we want cinema to become too elitist, too much of a sort of a prestige club sort of thing. But anyway, I've gone on to all sorts of tangents there, all sorts of side things. But I guess it's all relevant. So I'll return to the movie in question, The Irishman. And yeah, I will go into some spoilers, so be warned before I start. So the movie is based on a true life character. It's based on Frank the Irishman Sheeran, played by De Niro. And this is, if I didn't mention De Niro's ninth appearance for Scorsese, I think I did. And Frank Sheeran, at the start of the film at least, is a pretty humble guy, a pretty humble working class guy trying to make ends meet for his family. And along the way he gets connections with this particular sort of big gangster family, and he gets infiltrated and he starts doing jobs for them. We see him doing their kind of handiwork and kind of being a muscle for them and doing various sort of just roles for them. And so he starts getting a bit more power. Obviously he gets more money, and he gets particularly associated with Jimmy Hoffa, who most people would know. He's played by Al Pacino, and Jimmy Hoffa, in case you don't know, was a unionist of the Teamsters, this big sort of union movement in America during this time. I think they still assist in some form today, but that's who Jimmy Hoffa was. And we see as played by Pacino, this really, sort of charismatic, but really egotistical and kind of fringe sort of character. He's very much sort of power hungry, and we see him having like political connections to the White House, and yeah, how he starts forging all these relationships and this power and becomes a very dangerous figure. And I mean, I know some of the actors involved in the film. I think Harvey Keitel, for example, he was saying how there was um, how there are like modern political themes that sort of resonates and kind of warnings. And you can sort of see that. I did sort of read the Hoffa character in this film as like a Trump sort of figure, like this sort of very much in his own world, very much deluded, lacks any sense of like morality or character or just awareness of his actions and how they affect other people. So very much in his own bubble, and I think you could sort of see that. So a lot of the film is about the relationship between Frank and Jimmy Hoffa, and ultimately how later on, I mean, it builds to finally when the family decide that Hoffa's gone too far and is too much of a liability, and ultimately it is Frank who is asked to kill him, to do the dirty deed. But the film jumps through different time periods, looking at different eras of the family and of Frank's life. And so the film is over 3 hours long. It's a really, really long movie. And obviously very few films, in my opinion, can justify that. But it makes sense because it does go through a great deal of his life, and at the end of the film, in the last sort of half of the film, that themes of death and mortality and sort of reflection on your life and what have you, it does become a big part of the film. Plus the fact I think it is literally Scorsese saying goodbye to these actors. They've obviously have this friendship, this respect, and it's almost like this is their big goodbye, this movie. So I think actually the length of the film is to do with that. It's to do with the journey, to do with the character's life, and yeah, I mean, you don't actually see him die, but it goes up like very close to his death, like the end of his life, and when he's starting to get more frail and he sees people around him start to die. So the end of the movie is all about that. And it's largely about also his isolation from his family. So he's got daughters, and particularly his oldest daughter, played by Anna Paquin, who actually could have been in the movie more. Her part is underwritten. That's one of the roles that they could have given more time to. But I think that's partly because it's meant to be like this absence in Frank's life, or he's an absence in her life growing up. So that's sort of a big part of it as well, a big theme, the fact that as he gets more power, as he gets more responsibility in this big mafia family, he has less time for his family, he becomes more isolated from them. And I think the scenes that were quite effective in the early part of the film was when you see his daughter when she's younger, and it's almost like she has these instincts where she sort of knows what's going on with these mafias, and she knows them, they're sort of no good, and she's doesn't trust them. So you have the Pesci character, who's one of the big, has a prominent role in the family, and him and De Niro have a lot of scenes together. And so you see them, like there's a scene when they're bowling, and De Niro apologizes to the Pesci character because the daughter's being very standoffish, and yeah, is kind of making it clear that she doesn't want to talk to them, doesn't want too much to do with them. And so Frank apologizes, and the Pesci character says, "Oh, it's all right. It's just the way kids are. It's no problem." But just stuff like that, I think is really effective, quite interesting, and it sort of builds up the history, and it leads to him being like estranged from his daughter later on in the last half of the film. So the daughter wanting nothing to do with him as an adult because of what's happened. So I mean, I've probably already indicated with some of the things I've said, but yeah, I really, really like this film. I think it's a return to form by Scorsese. So I'd say it's his best film in a very long time. I'll talk about the performances because I think it's really well cast. I think the performances are really, really good. I think they really deliver the goods. They sort of slowly work their way into the roles. I think De Niro is just this kind of everyman. It's kind of him at his best. He's very understated, but he is a presence. He's very tough and physical when he needs to be. But I mean, this is a more subtle sort of humanistic role in a way. He does disappear into the character. And I thought the relationship with the Pesci character was just beautiful and really subtle. Because I think what's great about the Pesci character is then he's almost the opposite end of the spectrum from the Pacino character. He is this more quiet, reserved, like mafia character that just sneaks up on you. You don't really see his like power or dominance. For a lot of it, he seems like a reserved or a sort of a frail old man. But the point is he's very quietly, like softly spoken, and he has this wisdom, he has this way of doing things which is totally opposite and different from like the traditional dominant, angry, like masculine sort of mafia figure. And that's almost how he gains power, how he gains respect. He's a lot more smart about it, he's a lot more calm, and just has different methods. And Pesci's performance, he almost steals the film. He's absolutely brilliant. Because it's funny, when I was watching it early on, because I love Pesci anyway, I mean, anything he's in, I pretty much love. Obviously, I think he was in Raging Bull as well. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was. So very good in that. Great in Goodfellas. Obviously, I love him in things like Home Alone and My Cousin Vinny, the Lethal Weapon movies, and more, comedy sort of roles. But he's always great. Never really put in a bad performance, Pesci. So it's great to see him back. But I mean, you sort of wonder with him being in retirement for so long, would he really be up for it? I mean, is he gonna deliver? And so early on in the film, I sort of thought that, but no, it's such a such a nicely understated performance that builds over the course of the film. And it just makes sense. You can see totally what he's going for. It's a really great performance. And the main cast, as I said, all deliver. I think Pacino's really great. I think this is his best performance in a while. I mean, it is this very sort of manic, like very charismatic kind of OTT, but I don't mean that in a bad way. Pacino, it kind of has the feels of the sort of like acting and roles he was taking on kind of in the second phase of his career, you know, in the 1990s when it was the more over the top eccentric characters where you were sort of being entertained by his larger than life, where almost Pacino became like a persona in itself, which became a bit sort of wearing after a while. It became a bit, it did grate on you, and it lost some of that mystique of early Pacino because he was very much from the old school. Very much, you know, he was a character actor, but part of what made him such a good actor was the fact that you knew very, very little about him, and it was this much more nuanced sort of performances that, you know, gradually just got lost because he just became, pardon, a caricature of himself. But anyway, I think for this film and this part of Jimmy Hoffa, I think that actually works out really well. It makes sense because, as I said, the guy is such an egomaniac. And I think Pacino understands that. I think he like he gets that across, but also just how dangerous he is potentially. And I think because Pacino, the actor, the guy, is almost the opposite of that, but he certainly comes across that way in interviews. He comes across very relaxed and very, you know, like a pretty cool guy who you would like to have a beer with. I mean, who knows? He might be a jerk. You don't know, but certainly in interviews and stuff, he comes off that way, and so it's almost that thing. Then when you are the opposite of that, you sometimes you can get inside their heads a little easier, and you know, and not understand it, but kind of. It's almost that idea of you understand it because that's not what you are. You sort of see, yeah, the opposite of you, so you kind of understand why this character is negative, if you like. I hope I've explained that. You sort of get the impression, but yeah, I think Pacino's very good. I mean, there's certainly, you can see this film getting a lot of awards, attention, nominations, and I think Pacino could actually be one of them. Pesci too, perhaps, and De Niro. So you could see certainly a few of the cast. Keitel isn't in it that much, but you know, there are some good performances. But so again, it's a long film, and maybe one critique is certain characters could have been used more, could have been given more time, like Keitel, like Paquin, as I said. But really great casting, some great acting throughout. And there's some good de-aging effects because you see Sheeran at different points in his life. They obviously have to de-age De Niro at various points, you know, to make him look like he's in his obviously 30s or 40s, and that's really well done. That's very convincing, and it's justified because you're covering his life. And another great thing is then, well, there's a lot of humour in the film. I think you'll be surprised at how funny it is, and that is a part of Scorsese's catalogue. When you think of King of Comedy, Taxi Driver has a lot of at least black humour in it. Yeah, there are films of his, even though you think they're quite dark films, but I mean, they do still have a fair bit of humour, even if it is borderline, like Goodfellas as well. But New York, New York, that's one actually I remember being quite oddly funny, but you had a lot of, like, the humour was used to transition into something darker. But yeah, this is very sharply written, it's extremely funny, but it's very character driven, so you get these conversations that just build organically and they flow, and that's another good thing, the fact that he lets the scenes flow and they take on a life of their own. But when the funny moments come through these interactions, it doesn't feel forced at all. It just feels very natural. It feels like the sort of conversations these characters would have. So quite late in the film, there's this very funny scene where they're meeting in Florida, and like the Stephen Graham character, he's late to the meeting, and there's this Hoffa basically feels disrespected, so there's this whole like argument because he's 10 minutes late, and first of all he gives him shit for wearing shorts to a meeting, which is really hilarious. So you get this clash of like old school and new school. The fact that De Niro is saying, or Hoffa, Pacino's character, sorry, is saying, you always wear a suit to a meeting, never wear shorts. But then there's this kind of petty little squabble they have about, like, the Graham character has been 10 minutes late. It's either 10 or 5, I can't remember, but his excuse is and traffic was bad and he got held up in traffic. So the argument is whether for traffic you're allowed for 5 minutes or not. So that's kind of this petty sort of squabble, but it's really, really funny, the back and forth. And again, it is sort of realistic. You believe these sorts of characters would have those petty conversations, but they make it really funny. So that's one good example. So yeah, surprisingly funny film, and I think that's a good example why the film works so much and why it sustains itself over 3 hours, is because there is this lightness of touch to the scenes and to the characters. You know, you are dealing largely with unlikable characters, but Scorsese makes them engaging, and he does find some humanity in them. There's certainly sympathy for the De Niro character at times, even though, he is kind of unsympathetic himself sometimes. But Scorsese does find those lighter moments, those funny moments. And even though they're really cold, distant characters, he does make them interesting and engaging, which is important. And I think I actually found this film very relaxing, like the pacing of it, and I love the fact that you spend so much time in their company. You get to know them, you get to know their world and stuff. So the pacing really couldn't have been any better. he really makes the most of it. You get to know the characters. So funnily enough, it never really dragged for me, the movie. It totally justified the lengths for the reason I mentioned, but for that reason as well, the pacing was really, really good. So interesting character. It is very character driven, which I think is important. And I think, as I said, he does play with form. He does play with sort of storytelling and character. So one example of that is then at a certain point he will freeze frame the screen when you've got like a character and it's showing them like maybe killing someone or doing something, having a drink in a bar. He sort of freezes the free if I can put my teeth in freeze frames the screen, and he puts up a caption saying what happened to that character later on. So he was killed, he was arrested, whatever the case may be. And it's a good way of like getting that across, what happened to them, because it saves for time later. But it's also a good sort of framing device, and it's a good way actually of taking you, like the audience, out of the film for a moment and actually reminding them, giving them a sense of morality, like reminding them that these are shady characters, they got up to bad stuff, and that there are consequences for that. So it does give it that sense of morality as well. So I really like those moments. They were really clever. Trying to think if there's anything else to particularly say. I think I've said most of it. As I said, the characters are really, really interesting. Some funny moments, some very tense moments. It covers a lot of interesting political sort of movements and eras, and has a lot of profound things to say, particularly when we get to the end of the film, to do with life and death and reflection and family. The ending is actually very moving. That's another thing that I sort of didn't expect, but because of the themes of the film and how it does comment on the end of your life and how it feels like it's like the end of the journey we've had with the Frank character, but it's also feels like the end for Scorsese working with these actors. It is obviously deliberate, the fact that Scorsese is getting on in years, the fact that some of these actors are getting on in years. Not that they're gonna drop dead anytime soon, but just when you get to a certain age, I think these things must come up and you must think about them. But I think just by reflecting on that in this movie and it becoming a big theme, I think it sort of suggests this is their big goodbye. This is the last time they all appear in a Scorsese movie. And what a send off it is. Really, it could not have gone much better. So another thing just to comment on before I finish up is that the music is fantastic in this film. It really plays its part in giving the scenes character. It's really well used, but it's a beautiful soundtrack. There's a lot of sort of blues and big band style numbers, and it's just beautifully used. It's got to be one of the best soundtracks of the year. And I'm gonna definitely get the soundtrack at some point. Some really great music in there. Just listen to the end credits, just like the music playing over that. It's just beautiful. But yeah, that's The Irishman. I'm really positive. I went in hoping it would be good, and it kind of exceeded that, really. I think it's a very, very good movie. They've really delivered on all fronts, and I look forward to seeing it again. But it comes out on a limited release this coming Friday, so if you can see it at the cinema, I recommend doing that, seeing it on a big screen. But of course, it's also coming to Netflix, and I know a lot of people have Netflix, so it's a chance to rewatch it if you've already seen it. If you can't see it at the cinema, obviously see it on Netflix. And it comes to Netflix at the end of November, and I think, as I said, there's a pretty big chance then it's going to be a contender come award season. You can see it getting quite a few nominations. So that's my review of The Irishman, and I'll just round off by saying my rating for it, and I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. Yeah, close to perfect. Scorsese's best movie in a very long time, and who knows, maybe one of his best movies, full stop. So 9 out of 10 for me. I really, really loved this movie. So if you've seen The Irishman, then please comment below in the comments, of course. Let me know what you thought about it. If you disagree with my review, then fine, chip in and say why. Yeah, if you haven't seen it, I guess don't really watch all of this video because quite a lot of spoilers, but when you do catch up with it, then you can come back and comment, and yeah, let me know your overall thoughts on the film. Which performances stood out for you? Which did you think was the highlight, and who do you think would be worthy of getting like an Oscar nomination? But that's The Irishman, actually, the new Scorsese movie. And I'll be back soon with more movie reviews. Speaking of new films, recent releases, I also just did a review of Terminator Dark Fate, which is now up on the channel. So you can check out that review and get involved in that conversation. But this has been my review of The Irishman, which I absolutely loved. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys again soon. Goodbye.